it was like I was somewhere else. I knew I was still in the room, but I was also in a different room. And it was a dark room with a symbol on the wall. And it was a symbol that looks like the alpha symbol for the Greek letter, but it turned on its side. And I looked at this. It only lasted like 5 to 10 seconds, but I started crying. I was like, "Oh my God! Like what is happening?" Like, and all of a sudden, it was almost like I don't like using the Matrix analogy, but it was like Neo just realized there was something else.
Hello and welcome to Nourish. My name is Kasha and I'm a holistic counselor and first-year doctoral student studying acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine. My mission with this podcast is to share the stories of inspiring humans who have discovered that elusive state of balance between the Western concept of success with more Eastern philosophies of inner knowing and spirituality. Think yin and yang in flow. Now, these two do not need to be separate, but I know firsthand how difficult it can be to reconcile them. As a Silicon Valley burnout SKP myself, teaser, I left the tech world after 10 years of a thriving career in product management. I want to share the stories that I wish I had heard when I was struggling to find that balance and flow myself. On this podcast, we'll cover topics on spirituality, authentic career and relationships, slow living, mindfulness, alternative healing, concepts from psychology, and stories of transformation via traditional Chinese medicine and acupuncture. We'll also provide you with the tools to truly integrate both sides of your yin and yang. My hope is that these interviews can inspire you to rethink your own approach to mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. And if you are struggling, find your way back to authentic alignment. So, sit back, relax, and ground yourself back home, my love. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome back to Nourish. I'm your host, Kasha, and I'm so excited to share this conversation with you today. So on today's episode, I spoke with Sébastien Fouillade, who is a startup CEO, former Microsoft product lead, father, husband, and psychedelic advocate. Sébastien is truly what I would call a champion of radically transparent spirituality. Although he has a pretty impressive portfolio of over 26 years of successes in product development, in tech, in leadership, it's really the openness and authenticity with which Sébastien balances both his spiritual side with his ambitious achievements that I feel truly sets him apart. So, Sébastien had his first out-of-body awakening in 2011, but he only really, quote, came out of the spiritual closet in 2019. And by doing so, he confronted head-on the stigma associated with psychedelics and being open spiritually, which that in and of itself, that whole story, I found to be super inspiring, whether you're talking about confronting stigma associated with psychedelics or any other part of who we are authentically. I think that this story will deeply resonate with many. So Sébastien really, since coming out of the closet spiritually, has redefined inclusion in the workplace. He's challenging cultural norms around how to successfully interweave both your spiritual life with your work life. And today, he's living his best life. He is working at the forefront of tech and psychedelics. He's a chief journey officer at Dvija Psychedelics, an advisor for Fraqtal, and the CEO of a really cool new stealth, so I can't share too much, startup in the psychedelic space. In addition to his startup portfolio, he's also the host of Leadershipadelics, which is a top psychedelic podcast that interviews world-class entrepreneurs and leaders who have had impactful experiences with psychedelics. And finally, he's a powerful advocate for spiritual sovereignty, encouraging everyone to be authentic and sharing their own life path. And I think that is just so beyond inspirational. especially as somebody who is stepping into that myself and really exploring how to show up authentically and realizing how difficult that can be for many. I found Sebastian's story to be super, super inspiring. So a couple of core themes that we discuss on this podcast. We dive into trust and surrender, what that looks like. We talk about Sebastian's spiritual journey, which I do know that I mentioned a couple of times, psychedelics. I do want to kind of throw out a quick disclaimer that I realize that psychedelics may not be for everyone, but they aren't the only path on your spiritual journey or the only option in exploring spirituality. And we definitely do get into that. So we talk about Sebastian's own journey with spirituality and his growth, which starts with breath works and then really evolves into this other sphere. So if you're somebody who is early on in your spiritual journey and you're curious about this, I really would encourage you to listen in. We also talk about the importance of intention without expectations, about Sebastian's kind of evolution around what healing looks like. We talk about the power of authenticity and how being authentic really does set you free. And also some of the trade-offs around what it looks like to not be authentic. And I'm not just talking about mental or emotional distress, but the physical kind of associations and physical disease that in many cases can surface. So I found that to really resonate with me personally. And then finally, a core theme that we discuss is balance, balancing your own needs with your responsibilities, the needs of your family. So if you are a caretaker that is struggling kind of finding the balance between those, I think that this episode will be really, really eye-opening. All right. So without further ado, I am so excited to jump into this. Let's get started and welcome Sébastien Fouillade to the podcast, and let's jump right in. All right, we are live, Sébastien. I am so beyond excited to have you here today, and honestly, to have you join me for this conversation at what is a pretty pivotal time in your life. So before I jump into some of the questions that I ask everybody, I do just want to check in with you. How are you doing? How are you feeling? Tell me everything.
Wow. Well, thank you for having me here. It's really fun to be able to catch up and just share my story. I'm like a bowl of emotions right now. This is that new chapter in my life. I've left my corporate job. I'm taking on a lot of big things in a very complex field, and so. In fact, just on my drive back from dropping off my daughter, I was listening to a podcast that talked about a lot of the controversies in the field. And I was like, oh, wow, yeah, it was a good reminder of what I'm getting myself into. So I'm excited. I feel free. Yeah, it's just awesome. And, I can dive in deeper, as we talk.
Yeah, I was just saying that we're going to get into all of that. I have so many juicy questions, but I'm just pumped to be talking to you at like this very moment because Friday was your last day. You just announced it. And I know that this was such a long time coming, for me, knowing you personally. And that's what makes that so much more exciting to like have it be like at that point. But all right, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I want to before we dive into all of those juicy questions, I want to start with a little bit of an intro. And I know that we're going to be talking a lot about careers and changes and like, kind of bringing together your different parts of yourself into the work life. But I actually want to start with a question, an introduction, describing you in 3 words. How would you describe yourself? Not using anything that you do for a living, so non-work related, so that way we can get a feel for who you are.
Oh, well, I'm starting to merge it all together. So, not using anything I do for a living. I think I'm a dad, husband, and creator. Uh, those are really those kind of three aspects of my life that are close to me.
All right, so I'll flip it for you. What would you say if I didn't restrict it to work related? Because I absolutely love that you're bringing that all together. And that's, a lot of what we talked about. But what would you use?
Entrepreneur, I use that, even though it's kind of cliche and lots of people use it. But I do feel like it's tied back to creator. I like to create things, companies, teams, experiences. Musician, I forgot about that. Is another one. I love to play music. You'll find me on LinkedIn. I play those Flute Friday videos, Happy Flute Friday, to bring some energy. So musician, that kind of goes back to creator again. It's funny. I've had a lot of reflection on this one. There's the saying, "I'm a lover, not a fighter," and I feel like most of the time I'm on the lover side. But I do have the fighter too. But I think there's probably more of the lover side too. And I like leading with love. That's what being the lover means to me, and giving love to people around me.
I love that. Not to use the word like one too many times, but I think that's really beautiful. And especially to hear you use those words and the three that you mentioned before, to use those to describe yourself, despite working in like a very, for lack of a better word, aggressive, masculine, very like do kind of environment, to have you use those words to describe yourself, I think, just further amplifies your uniqueness. All right, so let's dive into some of that. Tell me, what is your background and upbringing?
Upbringing. I grew up in France until I was 15. I grew up in, it was Roman Catholic tradition or culture, and I think the men were tough, and the role of women was very traditional. It was very French, and then I moved to New York City. Actually, I went to a boarding school, all boys boarding school, which had a huge impact on me because I didn't like it at all. And the only way I left that boarding school was when the whole family moved to the US. And I was like, wow, freedom. The US is freedom. I don't have to deal with that boarding school anymore. And so that really opened my mind to a different world. And I landed basically in New York City in the 90s, with my parents. And that was the time when the war on drugs was in full effect. I mean, I would ride in the subway and would see those posters of like, this is your brain on drugs. Be scared, be really scared. If it doesn't come from a doctor, that's bad. And so, that's what you were taught. And then at the same time, I loved art and I loved engineering. And I ended up doing computer engineering at Boston University. And I did that for a few years. And then afterward, I started my own business. And it was very much just zeros and ones, and trying to find a way to create using the engineering tool that I'd learned. And so that happened for, until 2011, when I had my first out-of-body experience, which changed my life.
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I didn't know that about you. I didn't know the whole boarding school side of things. And it's so interesting because to imagine you going to I guess having you go to an all men's boarding school, not to kind of paint the tech world as a certain kind of picture. It's obviously changing, but I guess it does make sense. It's a pretty, largely male dominated environment. Well, okay. So for everybody listening, you obviously don't have a video view into this, but when Sébastien says that he went to this very conservative school, if you could just see him right now, all right? The guy has a phoenix on his shirt. He has some a colorful poster back there. I'm just saying it is the opposite of conservative religious Hogwarts, which we're going to get into, but I just want to paint that for everybody so you can kind of have a visual. That's why I'm so shocked. So that actually segues pretty well. Actually, no, I would love to hear how that segues into, this whole new path that you're pursuing. And, you and I both have talked about this. I call you the most powerful advocate of spiritual sovereignty. You talk about it in your book, Stairway to Healing, a lot about your spiritual awakening in 2011, which has obviously led to some pretty exciting developments in your life. So could you talk a little bit about that whole experience for those people who are not me, who haven't read your book? Like, walk us through what happened in 2011 and like, where were you as you kind of led into that? And then what happened?
Yeah, so about 10 years ago, I was doing another startup, and the mission of the startup was to help families reconnect with nature. And so it was to help, and I believed at the time that nature was a great healer. I still believe it, and that we could help families get their kids off devices and reconnect back with nature. And so that's the mission I was on, and I had left Microsoft to actually get on that and do this full time. Now it was pretty intense. It was a startup, and I decided to do some yoga to kind of help me work with the potential stress that would come from running a startup. And I loved it. I mean, it was hot power yoga. It was really intense. It's what I needed. But then I decided to go further and take on teacher training. And as part of yoga teacher training, you do meditation and you do some more advanced yoga classes. And one of those yoga classes was pure breath work for 2 hours, where a teacher guides you through different breath sequences. And eventually, toward the end, you kind of wrap it up and you can do some humming and other things, but it's all with your eyes closed for 2 hours. And so toward the end, I started doing some humming, and it was like, and you kind of go through that, and all of a sudden, it was like I was somewhere else. I knew I was still in the room, but I was also in a different room, and it was a dark room with a symbol on the wall, and it was a symbol that looks like the alpha symbol for the Greek letter, but a turn on its side. And I looked at this. It only lasted like 5 to 10 seconds, but I started crying. I was like, "Oh my God! Like what is happening?" Like, and all of a sudden, it was almost like I don't like using the Matrix analogy, but it was like Neo just realized there was something else, and all of a sudden, I was like, "Oh my God." I say that a lot because that's what I thought then. I said, all that spiritual bullshit is true. And for me, it kind of shattered everything because, like I'd gone to church before and they'd talk about spiritual stuff, but I never experienced it. I was an artist and I drew things, other worlds and all that, but I never thought of them in a spiritual way. And when that happened, that really kicked off my quest, my spiritual quest to learn more.
Oh my God. So, I wasn't
No
gonna.
drugs.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask,
That's the
right?
other thing I was going to say. I was still I hadn't touched any illegal drugs or anything like that. I wasn't even taking those pharmaceutical drugs, like none of that. It was all breath work.
Oh my God. So I have to say, Sébastien, that first of all, I read your book and I do remember actually that your kind of first taste and like your spiritual awakening was thanks to a breathwork session. But for some reason, like as I was coming into this interview, I remember like fixating on some of the other stories that we talked about. And the reason why I mention this is like, it is actually kind of nuts, this whole breathwork experience. And I know that some people in the audience, some may resonate, others may be like, I have no idea what they're talking about right now. But the timing of this interview is absolutely unbelievable because I actually took a breathwork class yesterday myself for like the first time ever, by the way. Like I've done some minor things, you know, like in an online class, but it was in person. And I had an insane experience as well. So for me to hear you actually kind of speak to this, like ends up validating what happened to me. But just before I go into that, okay, I have a question for you. You know, first of all, I want to call out, I think you were ahead of your time with this startup, you know, like getting off of tech, like just side tangent over there.
Well, that's why we didn't make any money.
Yeah. But I feel like, you know, revisiting that in the future might be a good idea. I just wanted to throw that out there. But getting back to the breath work, like when you had this moment, okay, this out of body experience, which, you know, and I'm just speaking even like personal question here. How did you trust it? Like what went through your mind? Like what was the experience in your body, in your mind that like allowed you to believe and trust that what you had seen was real and like kind of propelled you in this direction?
Yeah, I love. How would I trust that what I had seen was real? There's like so much packed in that question, you know, and you know, taking it apart. There's the trust aspect, and there's the reality aspect in there, and it's interesting because I had started to change my philosophy as I was taking yoga and meditation on not trying to question everything. And you know, as an engineer, you're taught to, you know, take things apart and learn how they work. Um, even in religion, there's all the stories that explain the whys. Even though they ask for leap of faith, there's still tons of stories that explain the why, so that you can believe in something. But my philosophy at the time before that experience that had just changed was, you know, like if you're walking on a hike and there's beautiful flowers around you, and enjoy the flowers, like appreciate them for what they are. Don't take them apart. And most people do that. It's like, why should it be different for some experiences in your life? And so as actually it started when I was doing meditation, because even in meditation without the breath work, I was going like really deep. I was like completely disappearing and seeing things that were like the Tron movie. And again, that was without drugs and even without breath work. And so I was like, yeah, I know maybe I'm doing this to my brain or that to my brain, and that's what it means and all that. But like, it's like at the end, if I don't question it, and if good is brought into my life because of those experiences, can I just take the good and for what it is and use it to move forward? Because I realize as soon as you start taking apart some of those things, you actually break them. Uh, and so when I went to that first yoga class for breath work, I had no idea what the class was about. I was with a completely open mind. I just went there because it had. I just took it because it had a cool name, and I was completely blown away by the end of the class. So you know, it's a balance. Like sometimes you do have to take things apart and understand why they're the way they are, but other times, like when something really good comes to you, I think you should focus on the good and how you take that moving forward to change your life. Or you could spend a lot of time taking it apart and eventually forget to take it forward. So that's.
Oh my God. That hits home so hard right now, Sébastien. Like I actually feel like you channeled that like message for me in that moment. Like that was just insane. Actually, like not to be totally off here because and you know me, right? Like I am the ultimate. I think I was even diagnosed by my therapist at some point as like, quote, lacks trust in the world. Like that is literally, I don't know if it's like a diagnosable, you know, mental problem, but I have it. And, you know, it's just so interesting to hear you kind of share your perspective on trust, because, it's like you didn't exactly answer my question, but you completely did at the same time. And I just love it. So before we dive into, we kind of move along on your incredible journey, I just want to briefly share what happened to me, because I feel like this will just hit home for you as well. And it literally speaks to what we were just talking about in terms of trust. So I was in this breathwork class. Again, similarly to you, I just signed up. It was randomly offered to me in the community that I'm staying in right now in Puerto Rico. There aren't a lot of very, at least not in the open, spiritually minded, slightly hippie type people here. I feel like I'm beating my own, marching to the beat of my own drum. But this woman had just moved in last week and she was offering this class. I show up, whole bunch of strangers. We go through a series of crazy breathwork exercises, which bring up all the emotions. There are some crazy bonding exercises around eye gazing and, kind of imagining, speaking, asking some really deep questions. And so people were kind of in a heightened emotional state. And at the very end, we were sitting there kind of doing our closing meditation. And I remember the teacher saying, in this moment, you might get some very clear messages. And I'm sitting there and I'm just I really wish that the universe would tell me if I'm on the right path right now. In my head, silently, I'm saying this, universe, give me a sign. The class ends 15 minutes later. This woman, random woman who I've talked to once in my life, 2 words, hello, goodbye type of thing, comes up to me with tears in her eyes. And she says, I don't know why I feel like I have to tell you this. I just want to let you know that you are on the right path.
Oh, wow.
Is that not insane?
Yeah.
Talk about you cannot explain this, but I'm just floored, insane, right?
It is insane. And I've seen this so often. I'm filling my tea right now. So if you hear water,
you're not
the
peeing.
tea.
Okay,
Yeah,
everybody, it's the tea. He's not going to the bathroom live on the podcast. All right, go ahead, Sebastian.
But no, I'm done. I filled my tea. It's amazing. But what's surprising is I'm seeing that a lot with people who are following their calling and following their path, is things start falling into place in kind of amazing ways. And, what's interesting with breath work, I don't know if you're familiar, there's Stanislas Grof. He's a researcher that's written many books. And he studied thousands of patients who did breath works, because he couldn't do studies using psychedelics. So he was able to create those entheogenic states, higher states of mind, using breath work, and have very similar experiences, and did a lot of studies on that and wrote a lot of books. So if for people who are interested in breath work, they should check out his work. And there's a lot of similarities between breath work and work with psychedelics. Wow. But it's fascinating. The other thing, to talk about trust, you brought up earlier, there's a fantastic book called The Surrender Experiment by Michael Bollinger, which talks about kind of surrendering to the universe and quieting down that little voice inside of you that's always, trying to get that trust in order to move forward. Oh, that necessary trust. So, that you just reminded me of all that. And your experience, it sounds fantastic, and the timing is uncanny. And, I already know you're on the right path. So I mean,
well, thank you. Thank you for further validating it. But we will definitely link those books in the show notes. And I just also want to shout out, this whole surrendering thing. I could have used that book, a couple months ago, Sebastian. So thanks for that. Just kidding. I also went through a lot of recent changes, as I mentioned in some of the other episodes, and also in my trailer. So yeah, thank you. So let's talk about changes, Sebastian, because this experience happened in 2011, and it is now 2021, almost 2022. So I think it's fair to say that you didn't just have this experience and then realign and overhaul your life. Like, what happened between then
Yeah,
and now? Tell us.
it's interesting. This is really this is more of a cautionary tale. When I started learning meditation, uh, my yoga teacher said, "Be careful, because you might start seeing things differently afterward, and you might start wanting to make changes in your life." And I think it was a disclaimer that he put out there, because it's like, hey, be careful what you're asking for. And and also is like, and I'm not going to be there all the time to kind of help you and coach you through that. So make sure you have friends who can help you. But what's interesting is, as I started with meditation and then I had that experience, I started seeing things in my life that weren't necessarily aligned with the person I was. Things in my relationships, things in my relation with work. But at the same time, I wanted to deepen my understanding. So I was like, wow, there's something out there that I've left my body. So, can I do that again? And what will I find? So I started doing float tanks. I increased my meditations as well. When cannabis became legal in the state of Washington, I started using that with meditation, and I was like, "Oh, that's fun." I go a little deeper, but and then eventually I learned about psychedelics. I learned about ayahuasca, and so I did ayahuasca with Native Americans here in the state of Washington, while my wife, and that was 6 years ago, went down to the Peruvian jungle to do ayahuasca at the same time. And some amazing things happened that I could go into if people are interested. If that's something. Okay.
Tell me,
Well,
talk about your first, talk about the experience, either the first or whichever ones are just standing out. I want to know. Tell us.
So this was my first experience with psychedelics, and one big disclaimer is, before I got there, I had already done a lot of work on myself. That was 4 years after my first out of body experience through breath work. I had done a lot more breath work. I'd done a lot more meditation. And that breath work I had done was the type of breath work that completely takes you apart and rebuilds you. I already got tremendous insights from that, and I'm very grateful for those experiences. So I didn't go in working with psychedelics with a dirty slate, I guess. So my slate was maybe a little bit cleaner than it would have been otherwise. And that's important to call out, because preparation is huge when working with psychedelics. And so my first experience took place on the Olympic Peninsula, which is beautiful, by Seattle, and it's in nature. It was an outdoor ceremony around a big bonfire, and you ingest this medicine. It's like a little shot that the leader of the ceremony gives you, and about an hour in, you're all around the circle quietly, and about an hour in, you start feeling the effects. And I was looking at the fire at the time when that was happening, and the fire starts sinking into the earth and going up and down and up and down, like the earth was breathing. And I get that big smile on my face, because I was like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. And the sparks, it was at night, and the sparks start connecting with the stars. And at that point, I just left, I closed my eyes, and I just left my body. And the music starts, and it's Native American chants, and it's a little bit of humming and droning music, and my perception of it is so different, my understanding of the music completely changes. It's almost like I can glide with the music and hang on every single note, and all of a sudden it's almost like I'd left my body again, and it's almost like I'm in a dream, but it's a lucid dream. I've total control over myself in that experience and what I do. I started seeing all kinds of crazy things, beautiful things. I could travel the world. I could connect, and I was like, oh wow, my wife is in Peru doing a ceremony right now in the jungle. Let me connect with her. So I traveled to that ceremony in the jungle. I met my wife, and I was like, honey, hi. We weren't married yet. It was just the same year we got married. We were right before, and I was like, hi, yeah, how are you? And I was still very much of an engineer, and I still am. And I was like, I wanted to test the connection. So I was like, I'm going to give you a number. And when we meet again in a couple of weeks, when you come back from the jungle, you're going to give me the number back. And so I give her a number. Yeah, I did give her a number, and I gave her a number. It was 63, and when she and then I had two more ceremonies after this one, where a lot of other things happened. I saw the birth of our daughter 2 years before she was born, and I was able to explore my relationships in the past and some of unhealthy dynamics that I had because of how I grew and my parents' divorce and so on. And but when I met back with my wife a couple of weeks later, like she came back and I was like, okay, honey, like what was the number I gave you? And I was all excited because like this was going to validate everything and completely like make the news everywhere. It's like two people connect and validate it with a magic number. And she was like, I don't know what number. I was like, oh, come on, try it. And she came up with all the numbers except that number. But there was a lesson there. There's a lesson from grandmother ayahuasca. That's how we call the medicine in the circles, because it's that elder spirit that's been there for a long time. And about a year later, I'm scanning some old photo albums and from France when I grew up, and I see in the margin the number 63, and I was like, oh, what's that? And it says 6-3 and the year anniversaire de maman, and it was my mother's birthday. Because in France we write the dates with the day first and then the month second, and so every year I actually mixed up the days for my mother's birthday. I didn't know if it was March 6th or March 3rd, and it's March 6th. And so the first lesson I got from working with the medicine was like, you shall never forget your mother's birthday ever again. Um, and this is an important story because it's important to go into these with an open mind and realize that sometimes the lessons you get, the change of perspectives that you get, you don't really understand it even right away. It might take like a year or 2 years to kind of be like, oh wow, that is what I saw then. And so there's a lot about intent without expectations in those ceremonies. It's like, don't expect it to heal everything, but have the intent to go in there with an open heart and share your intent. So that was very special. And then I had very beautiful ceremonies after that. And I could talk about them for hours.
I love that. I love that you bring up, kind of the importance of not having an expectation, because I think that is like so closely entangled with just trusting what comes up. And I mean, it's medicine. So what you get may not be necessarily what you expected to get, but it's what you need at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, it's so hard because we have that Western mindset around medicine of like, oh, I've got a headache. If I take Tylenol, I expect my headache to go away. You won't say, oh, well, I have the intention of healing, so I will take Tylenol. No, as I expect my headache to go away. That's, and so with working with psychedelics, it's a little bit different because they open a door, and then there's a whole context of a ceremony around it, and how you come into the ceremony. All that plays a role, and sometimes you get messages and information, and you get so much information that it's hard to actually remember everything after the ceremony. So I've also developed like strategies for that and to work with that. So yeah, having an open mind is really important, and understanding it's not a pill, or it's not just the substance that you get and it will fix that, and then you just move forward.
Yeah. So speaking of an open mind, let's talk about places that are not typically very open-minded. The corporate work environment. So something, Sébastien, that has always stood out for me from the very beginning, actually, because I think you and I talked about this whole spiritual experience that you had probably like within the hour of us first meeting at a corporate event where we were both speakers. This is a pretty large annual event that would be held every single year. Yes. And I just remember being really inspired by the honesty with which you communicated your story, your truth, like who it is that you are, and how well you integrated that into your life. But I can also imagine that, first of all, having these experiences and these shifts in perspective, like that in and of itself is already an overwhelming experience, I would assume. But then integrating that back, like just coming back and then going to work, on Monday, or, God forbid, actually bringing that out into the open, which is what you did. Like you, and I quote, call it coming out of the spiritual closet. Like you really, I know you said you didn't coin that term. I think you coined that term, for me at least. That's what I believe. Having you show up so honestly in the corporate environment to your colleagues, to like the entire world. You're like so open about these experiences on LinkedIn. You wrote a book. What was that process like? And, when did you really start to share that? And why? Why don't we start with why? Why did you do it? And like, how was it sharing it? Start with the why. Like, what finally like inspired you, compelled you to do this?
Well, it actually goes back to your previous question of, I had all those experiences and I didn't change overnight. It actually was a process to get there. And I've known people who've changed overnight for those experiences, but it's really, really hard. And especially if you have a family. I have 3 kids, and so there's a lot of responsibility there. And there are a lot of expectations, and you have duties, and you can't just say, well, I'm going to forego all my duties. You're on your own, and I'm going to start, playing drum and, share the love with the world. This is like extreme and stereotype, but like you can't do that. So, I had one very powerful experience, and I write about it in my book, when basically I had 3 cups of ayahuasca, and it was my first night, and I left my body again, and I met with a tribe of elders, and those elders were like giant trees looking down upon me, and they were like whispering to each other, and they were like, and then told me, it's like, no, like we accept you in our tribe, and you need to follow your path to heal people. And then further in that during that retreat, I had an old lady that told me she talked with my grandmother and said that my grandmother would like me to sing more. In my mind, it's playing music. So I had all those messages. And, I tried to ignore them for a while. And then I got more and more depressed because I tried to basically separate those two sides. I tried to have kind of my corporate side where, I wouldn't be colorful. I would wear my Clark Kent suit during the day, and at night I would, take it off and, be in my Superman outfit, which was more colorful and joyful. But I had those two parts of my lives that were completely separate from each other. But the problem is, my heart was kind of going across those two parts. And so when I would go in the corporate environment, and there were things like, maybe it was the customers we were working with, maybe it was the way we were rolling down certain narratives within the corporation. There was a lot of things where it wasn't aligned with who I was, and I was kind of playing along. And there was one, and I eventually went through a deep depression. It was in 2019. I was traveling a lot. I was going to China. I was going to conferences in Europe, and maybe it was the conference when we met around that time. But I was sick all the time, and I didn't know what was wrong. I went to see the doctor. We did a bunch of tests, and they're like, "Well, where do you work?" I told them where I work. They're like, well, I can give you some antidepressants, or you can go talk to my wife, who's a therapist. And so I went to talk with his wife a little bit, and I didn't want to do antidepressants. But eventually I realized, I was like, I'm totally misaligned. I'm misaligned with, who I want to be, where I'm at, what I'm learning and evolving to through my spiritual journey. And I'm in this corporate framework. So eventually I realized, the truth will set you free, but your authentic self will set you free. Like it's too hard to lie to yourself. It's too costly. I mean, some people are really good at it, and but eventually there's a toll. Uh, so for me, that this was kind of non-negotiable at one point. It was like, no, I just need to be me, and I need to be me all the time. I can't have this time where I'm not me. And I think it's also really important from visibility and authenticity, just the responsibility when you're working with psychedelics. You have to be very responsible, but you have to be very truthful and honest about what you do. And there's a lot of people working at different levels with psychedelics, and if you're not truthful, if you're not open, if you're not heart led, bad things can happen as well. So it was non-negotiable, and it helped me make the depression more manageable. Or I wouldn't say get rid of it, because every once in a while I think it can come back a little bit, and I've felt that, but it's more manageable now because I know I'm following my heart.
Oh, gosh, that just hits home, Sébastien. I mean, just hearing you talking about the emotional toll that misalignment had for you, from an emotional, mental point of view, but also physical point of view. It's crazy because I've been talking to a lot of different people recently, from doctors of Chinese medicine, ancestral healers, therapists. And the one thing that is just such a constant theme that's coming up is how deeply connected our emotions are to our physical well-being. And I feel like that's something that is just starting to be discussed.
Oh yeah.
And it's just so important. In Chinese medicine, it is one of the major causes of disease. And that was really never a thing, just stuff it down, stop crying, don't show people how you feel. I mean, have your poker face. These are all terms that I definitely grew up with. I see you nodding your head.
Oh yeah. I grew up with that as well. The thing is, your subconscious knows. And with all the meditation that I had done, with all the yoga, the breath work and all that, I was like, nah, I've got a good handle over my subconscious. You don't. That's why they call it the subconscious. And so, the subconscious knows when you're doing something that is aligned. And so, like the depression for me was that I had brain fog. I didn't have the drive to do things. Like when I went to work, I literally got sick going to work. And so, like the image I have in my mind, it's almost my guardian angel or the subconscious that was kind of pulling me back and saying, you're on the wrong path, and I'm going to use whatever powers I have to show you you're on the wrong path. I'm going to cloud your mind. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I mean, it's all within me. It's all something I have in control. So it's not, I'm not delegating the responsibility here to a different entity, but there was my subconscious knew that I wasn't on the right path, and alignment is so overlooked for those things. I mean, I had that message loud and clear in a ceremony recently. It's like, if you create from a source of alignment, your creations are much more beautiful and authentic than if you create from a source of misalignment, where a lot of people do, and we can still do that. But creating from a source of alignment, whether you're a company, whether you're an individual or a team, you want to find that alignment.
So true. So what happened when you finally started to put yourself out there? Like, what was that like? Were you scared, or were you like, I have enough, I have to do it, I have no choice, and it was just easy peasy?
Yeah, I think there's a responsibility because there's such a stigma, and I'm a dad, and I have a family. That was kind of in the back of my mind of like, if I come out of the psychedelic closet and there's this stigma, like what could be the negative impact? And I think I thought about it, I meditated about it, and it's, how I came out, I think was in a very responsible and loving way, talking responsibly about the work that I did, because it's not like, I'm partying every weekend doing psychedelics. It's not that. It's like I use them selectively. I don't do them that often. I do them with purpose, with intent. And so I wanted to start telling the stories. And at the same time as I came out, the Michael Pollan book came out, How to Change Your Mind, which, helped a lot. I just actually recommended the French version to my mom just yesterday, because she's coming at it from a more traditional view of things. And she still has a lot of misconceptions around psychedelics. And it's like, oh, they can get addictive. I'm like, no, they can't. A lot of people don't want to touch them after they've had an experience. It's like, oh, they're going to mess up your life. You're going to end up in a dark alley somewhere. I'm like, no, please go read that book and understand really, get past that narrative that you've been fed. And so I recommended the book in French, which, it's a fantastic book if you don't know anything about psychedelics. If you know anything about psychedelics, it's not that great. But anyway.
We're going to put in the show notes. Don't worry. And I haven't read that one. I'm putting that on my to-do list. I love that. I love Michael Pollan. So, all right. Now you're taking this whole coming out to a next level. You recently, so recently, we're recording this on a Monday, y'all. As of like Friday, you left your tech job. I don't know. I think we probably mentioned the name, but you were kind of killing it there, dude. Like, I know you because we work together, but you were on the up and up. Like, the life path was looking very linear to the top, and you chose to leave that, I guess, particular stage of your career to pursue something completely different. Can you tell us what it is that you're up to, and what finally pushed you in that direction?
Oh, wow. Well, so it actually took 2 years to get to that day. To get to today, which is kind of the first chapter of that new journey. And the first step for me was writing the book. And the book was originally really for my children. But then coworkers and friends started asking about it. So I was like, I'll publish it. And it was a little bit more work to do that. But I thought it was important to share that story and kind of go through that process. It was my perception that this was a milestone in my hero's journey to put a book out. And writing a book, I have a lot of respect now for writers after I wrote my book, which isn't even that long. It's like 100 pages. And after that, the other thing that happened is there's things that happen at work. There's some characters that were very type A. There were some ways some projects were handled that made me really sad. And so when I was reflecting on that, it really kind of echoed. It was like, this isn't where you're meant to be. And I was struggling a lot. I mean, the best picture I can say is like every cells in my body were telling me to be somewhere else. And so, it's hard when you feel this way. And every day, you still do good work because you've been doing for 26 years. But you're not where you're supposed to be. So I hired a coach, and it's funny because I was never into coaches, but then I realized one day I was like, if I'm kind of like the product and I want to shape where I want to go next, I need to build a team and I need some help. And so I have a friend, Sean McCormick, that I've known for 10 years, and not working with him, but I've known him because he started a float tank business in Seattle, which I got to know him while I was earlier on my spiritual journey. And I reached out to him. He's a coach. And I was like, can you help me out? And my goal is to stop counting the days to retirement, because that's what I was doing. And a lot of people do that. And a lot of people do it well with patience, and it's okay with them. And I respect that. I'm very impressed. I don't do it well. I can't be in a place where I have to count the days to retirement, and I have to do something I love. I'm a total introvert. That's the other thing, and I like to say I'm an introvert on a mission. But if I don't lead with the heart, everything else kind of shuts off, and so. I do need to lead with the heart. I do need to follow the steps. So I hired Sean, and over the last year, we kind of put a plan together. I reconfigured my LinkedIn network, reached out to people. And as soon as I started kind of surrendering to the plans the universe have, amazing connections, uncanny connections started happening. Like people saying, oh, I just had a meditation yesterday, and then you reach out today, and those two connect together, and I'm going to help you. Like lots of other episodes like that, like the one you mentioned, started happening more and more and more. And so now, as I've left, that's Microsoft. I don't mind saying it. Now that I've left Microsoft, I'm going to focus on several projects, and one of them is a psychedelic company that's trying to build a network of retreat centers that will work with therapists, and the therapists will handle the preparation phase and the integration phase, which are super, super, super critical in all those experiences with psychedelics. And then the retreat centers will provide a safe environment to have those experiences. And so that's project number one. I'm going to be the chief journey officer for this one. And it's more of a fun title that, and I love talking about journeys because as a creator, I'm always creating journeys. And then the next project is an education platform for people like my mom who want to learn a little bit more about psychedelics. So that should be entertaining and fun, but also accessible to people who have no experience and didn't even read Michael Pollan's book. So that one
like
is
still...
Yeah. So that one I can't say too much because we're still in the early days of that, and it's what I would call like stealth mode. And then the last project, I just there's a few more. The last project is a crowdfunding platform for psychedelic companies. So it's called Fraqtal. And I think it's really important to enable people who want to support psychedelic companies to provide a tool to do that. And so we're working on that. And then I've got the podcast that I'm launching, Leadershipadelics, and that one is pretty exciting because it's looking at the intersection of leadership and people who've had deep psychedelic or spiritual experiences. So breath work, or open heart surgery, which can be very spiritual as well. So it's looking at the intersection of those two, and it was inspired by Steve Jobs, who said, "Hey, if Bill Gates went to an ashram or did more LSD, he'd be a broader guy." And honestly, like based on my experience, I think not only would he have been a broader guy, but maybe the way Microsoft works would have been a little different. And it would have been very interesting to see how different that is. So I kind of want to go beyond also psychedelics are just for mental health, but they also help kind of shape how you can create and lead, which clearly, if you look at the life of Steve Jobs, that was a big part of who he was. But he was also a very spiritual person as well, which it's not much talked about, but it's hinted at, because it wasn't as okay for him to come out of the psychedelic closet like when he was still around. Now it's becoming just more okay. I mean, we've got more people all the time coming out of the closet.
First of all, I'm so excited for your podcast. I know you just launched it, and I think the topic is just beyond inspiring. For so many reasons. Like one, I think it pushes the boundaries of, understanding your own mind, your own self, like connecting to the more spiritual side of things, but also connecting to your authenticity and putting that out there. And I just genuinely feel like, as somebody who similarly to you has gone through this experience of suppressing that and seeing what that does to your body, to your mind, to just so much of your life, I just think it's so important and powerful. But I mean, every single project that you just mentioned, I think is pushing the boundary a little bit. And I think it's absolutely fantastic and so exciting. I don't even know who's more excited. Like, am I more excited or are you more excited? We don't really know here.
Oh, I balance it with fear. Yeah, you're all the excitement. Like for me, it's like, well, I'm basically managing my time like a portfolio, which we were doing at Microsoft and with a lot of projects. So it's easy to do that. But, there's always fear because it's like something new. And even before ceremonies with psychedelics, I always have fear a little bit. And it's a form of respect for me. Like I know what I'm getting myself into. And this is no different with this new chapter. It's like, I know what I'm getting myself into. It's a very complicated space. There's a lot of controversy around it. There's a lot of work that's being done. There's a lot of money that's happening. And there's a lot, as a result of the money flowing in, it does impact how people behave to kind of show results and so on. So it's a super complex space. And I think the only way to move forward for me is to continue to be my authentic self, to continue to lead with my heart. And every time I haven't, I've regretted it. So
I think that's the best way to think about it, right? Like if you really do want to move through your life without regrets, then that's kind of the toss up, like, do you hide yourself, make yourself small, or do you put yourself out there? Even though it sounds like it's so easy, hopefully just hearing this interview will, kind of at least comfort a lot of people that it most definitely is not. But there are fantastic upsides in terms of just the way that you feel at the end of the day about yourself.
There's another thing, I was going to add to that. It's kind of a quote I had that came to me the other day. And I was like, if you're not your authentic self, how will your tribe find you? If you're hiding yourself, your tribe will never find you. And that kind of I want to do a little cartoon around this, because basically your tribe is out there, and what a lot of people, and I've talked to a lot of people on podcasts and personally, and you'll find a lot of people are actually looking for their tribe. And often in corporations, even though we do all that work of diversity and inclusion, and it's all well intended, you still don't find your tribe. And in fact, sometimes you feel like you're even more disconnected from the tribe as a result, because it start developing a really long tail of tribes, and they're like, where the heck is my tribe? And if you're not your authentic selves, they will not find you, and you'll keep looking for them, and it's never going to connect. And what's really important is, like, for me, is I keep finding more people from my tribe every single day. Like, they reach out, we talk, we're like, oh wow, we were thinking the same thing, and it's fantastic. And so that's the other thing to keep in mind, is like, you kind of owe it to yourself, if you want to be with your tribe, to be your authentic self. Otherwise, you're going to be sad looking for them for a while.
That's like the timestamp right there. Kasha's taking that quote, and I love that. Seriously, that just resonates so deeply. And actually, interestingly enough, I just want to actually build on top of that. I was listening to a podcast today. It was Mimi, the medicine. It was the medicine podcast, and they were talking about how we can get into this kind of loop in terms of how do we get stuck in these inauthentic positions? May they be work, may they be relationships, may they be friend groups, may they be lifestyle, whatever that is for you. Everybody has different versions of that. And, the podcast host, Mimi, was talking about her own personal experience, around really what it's like to try to fit in, to like meet those expectations that everybody has around you. May it be, success looks like X, like working at Microsoft, having the job, having the picket fence with the 3 kids, and like an amazing 401k, and, just really specific, like the size X bod, the perfect, like whatever it is, right? Like we all have that. And it becomes this loop, because when we do fit into those boxes, and when we succeed in those boxes, we are literally reinforcing for ourselves that this box, because we attract, people who also fit into those boxes, may it be authentically or not. And we end up reinforcing the story that this is the right box. And look how we're thriving in this box. So that means that the real me that's in here, it wouldn't fit in. And I just love what you said about the tribe, because it's such a reframe of, it kind of like shifts the lens to another kind of point of view, which is ultimately that it's not that coming out of the quote spiritual closet or whatever it might be for you, psychedelic closet, like, I don't know, yarn knitting closet. It's not that is anything that is wrong or shameful, even if it doesn't fit in with your current tribe. It's just that, your tribe is out there seeking you, and they will find you when you put yourself out there in that authentic way. And if it doesn't mesh well with the group you're with, whether it be your colleagues, friends, whatever, it just means that isn't your tribe. Like, that is just so beautiful. I love it.
That's funny you mentioned the box too, because in actually episode 0 of Leadershipadelics, we do talk about the box and the complex boxes we build in, how we build our own boxes in a way that we carry with us, and the really hard thing for people is to tell the difference between the narrative you've been programmed with all your life and what's really at your core. And it's almost like the nature and nurture thing is, and it's challenging, right? Because if you grow up in a certain environment, you're reinforced a certain narrative. And there's nothing wrong with that narrative. I'm not judging the narrative, but what happens is you believe that that becomes your narrative. And then as you grow as a person, you realize, oh, I like this, I like that, I'm a little bit more this way or that way. But now it's in conflict with that narrative that you've been receiving for 20, 30, 40 years. And then you step back and you're like, oh, shoot, there's that programming I've had. Then there's more programming on top of that from the media, the corporations and all that. And then there's who I am inside. And you get to a point in your life where you're trying to make sense of those pieces. And it can be really difficult. And it's sometimes easier to say, well, I see it, but that box is comfortable and there's this and I have commitments and it's okay. And you can continue down that path. But like for me, I also believe that heart, that inside of you that, you can really feel versus know with psychedelics. It's like you have to honor it and you have to appreciate how vast it is. It's much vaster than that box. It's huge. And if you even think about all the stories you could read as a person, the stories take you to so many places, and your brain is able to perceive all those places and states of mind. And why be in that little box when you can be beyond that box? And so like for me it's like I was kind of reflecting, but if I can help people more, it would be to like help them break out of that box to reach beyond, because humanity would be much more beautiful if we could really reach further into that vastness.
All right, I don't even want to add a comment on top of that. I have like 1.5 million follow-up questions for you, but I want to be mindful of your time. So we might need like part 2 of this episode. Seriously. So why don't you tell the audience, where can they find you? We're obviously going to link everything in the notes as well. Yeah,
LinkedIn. They can find me on LinkedIn. It's funny. I'm not doing Instagram. I'm not doing TikTok, even though I probably would do well on TikTok with my music videos. Sometimes I do YouTube, and it's kind of funny. I'll play some harmonica on YouTube, but it's really LinkedIn, and I'm picking LinkedIn because I feel like it's underutilized. And there's also a lot of people I'm trying to reach on LinkedIn. They're on LinkedIn looking for jobs because their life is at an intersection, and they're like, oh, like, what do I want to do next? Is it going to be more aligned with me? And so, LinkedIn, and they look at that feed and they see, wow, this guy is a little different. This guy is authentic. It's like, and maybe it inspires a little bit of reflection. And so start there. I also have a personal website, and I'll send you the links. You can put them in the show notes. If people want to support, and you see me on LinkedIn and you like the post, a like goes a long way. And it's not for my ego, but it's mostly for the ranking algorithms that bring it up. And I only mention that because most people don't know. And I've got people reaching out to me and they say, oh, I was really inspired by this. I'm like, did you ever like any of my posts? No, but I see them all the time in the feed. I'm like, if you like it, more people will see it, and this will help me a lot, because I'm starting that new journey, and so that's where people can find me.
Journey, pun intended. I think you should share this episode. Go check out Sebastian's podcast. We're going to link it all in the show notes. And I mean, this was just so inspiring. Thank you so much, Sebastian, for being here today. I think I speak on behalf of myself, selfishly, and all of the listeners, how inspiring this was. And I just want to say thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Happy to be here. Looking forward to the next one.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Nourish. If you heard anything on today's episode that really resonated with you, feel free to share it with your friends, your family members, or anyone who you think might be able to benefit from the conversation. Second, I am so eager to hear from all of you. If you have a moment and you'd like to, I'd so appreciate an honest review of Nourish. Of course, I love the 5-star reviews and it helps this podcast grow, but above anything else, I appreciate honesty. I promise I read each and every review myself, and I work to integrate your feedback into future episodes. Finally, if you want to connect with any of the speakers, please check out the show notes for direct links to websites plus social media. And if you want to learn more about holistic counseling or traditional Chinese medicine and the work that I do, please head over to my website at www.mirawellness.co or my Instagram at Mira_wellness_co to connect. Thanks again for being a listener, and see you next week.